Let's turn to Asia. South
Sure.
Korea just announced a big purchase of physical gold bullion.
Right.
More of this going to be coming out of Asia in the months ahead?
Yes.
Particularly given the fact that South Korea, close political ally of the U.S., it's a bit of a slap in the face to the U.S., isn't it?
Well, especially after the chairman's recent testimony, there was a colloquy at a public hearing between Ron Paul and Ben Bernanke, and Ron Paul, Chairman Paul was kind of berating Chairman Bernanke, saying, Mr. Chairman, when you wake up in the morning, do you ever think about gold? And finally, I think Bernanke lost his temper a little bit and said, gold is not money. Well, now we see the South Korean Central Bank saying, maybe gold is money. At least we're a bank and we're going to acquire some. And I think actions speak louder than words. I think South Korea's actions speak louder than Ben Bernanke's words.
Yeah.
But more to the point, when I saw they bought 25 tons, that came as no surprise that central banks would be net buyers. What I was interested in is where did they get it? Because I would have thought an order of that size would be an official to official transaction. So maybe it came, I would doubt it would come from the United States, but where could it come from? IMF or a few other places. But no, they bought it on the market, but they must have acquired it over time. I'm not sure who the sellers are. Now, what China's doing is even more interesting. China is desperate to increase its gold supply. But they understand that they're out to buy 3,000 tons. That's a far cry from 25 tons.
Without rocking the boat.
Without rocking the boat. Of course, the only way to do that is to basically buy mines and strip their own mines. So they've turned their domestic, i.e. Chinese, mining industry into a captive. And they're the largest gold producer in the world today. They produce about a little over 300 tons. So they're taking, not all of it, but about half those 300 tons are going into official holdings. The other half are being sold to the Chinese people. So they've turned their own gold mines into captives. But what they do is they go to the mining companies and say, look, gold's on its way to $1,700 an ounce or whatever. But your cost of production is $400 an ounce. So we're going to pay you $900 an ounce. So you're making very good profits, thank you very much, and I'm buying it for kind of 1/3 the world price. So, and they can enforce that through labor laws, environmental laws, tax laws. They've got so many guns pointed at the head of the domestic mining industry that they can do that. So they're not having market impact because it's going straight from mine to vault, and they're buying it below market because they have a captive industry. Now, what are the costs of that? There are two. Number one, pollution is awful. We all know that cyanide is used in gold mining, and Canadian and U.S. miners, they have to cache it, they have to capture it, account for every drop, and dispose of it, et cetera, and it adds a lot of expense to mine. In Japan, they just dump it in the rivers, so they're poisoning the rivers with cyanide. But the other thing they're doing, I was talking to an analyst this morning, and he said, well, if you extrapolate that out enough years, they'll eventually get to their 5,000 tons or whatever. The answer is no. Those mines are going to be depleted in about 4 years. So it's not as if there are a lot more mines. They're mining as fast as they can. They're taking all that gold and putting it in the vault, but they're going to strip those mines in 4 or 5 years, or maybe less. And so that's not sustainable from their point of view. So all the pressures, central banks going from net sellers to net buyers. What you see in South Korea, the Philippines have been buying, Vietnam has been buying. It's not just the big guys. Brazil looks very weak in this dimension.
And we know India stepped in to buy the IMF gold
Correct.
A year and a half ago, whenever that was. Sri Lanka, I think, bought some. Maybe South Korea bought some of the IMF gold that's been dribbled out into the market. It was accumulated over time, perhaps?
That's possible. I'm not sure. But the Indian purchase was interesting because that was a real slap in the face of the Chinese. It was the United States, because the United States, in effect, controls the IMF. So it was our way of saying, we take care of our friends and we marginalize our adversaries. It was definitely a slap at China, because China would have loved, because that gold went at $1,050 an ounce. China would have loved to have been buying some of that gold, but they weren't given the opportunity. It was given to the Indians. And India is another interesting case, because the official gold is not that great, but the private gold is huge. I don't know the exact number, but I've spoken to Indians and I've heard numbers from 5,000 tons up to 10,000 tons of private gold.
Yeah, I've heard even a little bit bigger than that on total private gold holdings, but
right,
they're big numbers.
Correct. So they're sort of a gold power, even though their official reserves are sort of puny.
And plus the production is inconsequential, so it's all imported and has a big impact on the world price, whereas China, to a large extent, is self-sufficient, at least for now.
At least for now. But they've still got their agents out trying to do what South Korea just did. But can you imagine the South Korean announcement applied to China? China just bought X tons. I mean, the last time they announced an increase in their gold reserves, it was the result of 5 years of covert activity. They had intelligence agents and private agents and anonymous names and doing all kinds of things in the market. They acquired, it was about 500 tons, and then they announced it all at once. But what they did, it was interesting. They have a sovereign wealth fund inside China called SAFE. It's the State Administration of Foreign Exchange. SAFE actually acquired the gold. SAFE is non-transparent, whereas the People's Bank of China tries to be somewhat transparent. So SAFE acquired the gold over 5 years and then flipped it to the central bank in a single accounting transaction. And then the People's Bank of China says, hello, we've got 500 tons. But they had been acquiring it for 5 years.
But just reported it at one fell swoop.
Exactly.
Once they had a certain amount. Was that a political statement when they reported it?
It was partly a political statement. It was also an indication of the dilemma they have because the market impact of Chinese announcements is so great. Now, again, this was back at, they were acquiring at various price levels between $700 and $1,000 an ounce. And then gold's gone up significantly from there. But can you imagine a comparable announcement today?
Yeah.
It would be the South Korea on steroids.
Yeah, particularly with what's going on in the world today.
Right.
Any last comments that you'd like to share with the viewers? This is going to be viewed by thousands of people around the world. Any last comments you'd like to wrap up on?
Yeah, I think, again, for people trying to preserve wealth, I always recommend a gold component. I never go all in. I would never advise a client to go 100% into gold, but my view is for the conservative investor, maybe 10%, for the more aggressive investor, maybe 20%. But even if you just think of yourself as a small saver with cash only and you don't bet on risky stocks, having 10% in gold is a good. That's not risky. That's a good, prudent thing to do. So I would just ask people to think about that.
It's a nice diversification to be in that safe haven.
Correct.
Okay. Jim Rickards, Senior Managing Director of Tangent Capital, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Really great pleasure.